Session 3 and 4 taught by Dr. Reams in Black in 1977. This is tape 28 side B.
The question was just asked then, the last one was, what about the royalty that was originally agreed to pay Dr. Reams, what and how and where supposed to be handled, and especially with the cards. Some of the things, it has been rather confusing about card reading, computers and all, and we're going to try to put a quietus on that very shortly with a total representation in writing, how that's to be done, how that's to be handled, and rather than trying to answer it right now, if you'll just leave that till we get those answers out, you'll have them. Yes, sir. Not with the new program. It may be of some other use for them, but the operation of the new program, the new computer, you could not use the old terminal with this new computer system. Well, we've been told that there was going to be a reclamation program for those. But since every time I've said that, I always had to eat my own words. I don't know. All I can say is once we have the new program operational, I give you my pledge. I will do everything I can to try to rectify that situation, even though it isn't my responsibility. I and our team will try to find some way with the powers that be with the older group and the amalgamation group to work out something for you that'll be equitable for your terminal. Yes, sir.
So far we've only had a letter of intent, but this is my order with earnest money.
Well, let me say this, and I told you earlier, the attorneys did not get the copy back for us, but within a few days, you will be mailed, every one of you that signed up for an original computer, you will be mailed a lease form, and instruction with it what to do to carry out that original agreement for a terminal. Now, some of you weren't in at that time, and so it's hard to determine who did and who didn't. But for those of you who didn't, I think it'd be wise for you to wait till the seminar where you can hear the whole thing explained. Most of these people did, and you weren't there at that time, those of you that didn't get in at that time. Because you have 1 year to still take advantage of this terminal program at the reasonable price that we're charging now, which is only the price for the leasing of the terminal and your maintenance and insurance costs. For that's all we're asking. It will be a higher cost later because there's an awful lot of things you're getting that somebody should pay for. Right now we're making it a gift to you. But we're doing that, but we're giving you, if you sign up within the period of time we've recommended, you will have 1 year to take advantage of that lease program the way it's being presented now. Yes, ma'am. Well, that's what I was saying. I would say, rather than trying to explain in a few minutes and maybe get everybody confused, because I seem like I'd done a pretty good job of that at a few of the other meetings, because this confusion, or a lot of the confusion came because there wasn't time and air to explain the reasons for the total computer program. But may I say, I think it would be best, if some of you are going to be a little later, to wait till the seminar where you'll hear the attorneys, you'll hear everything, and you'll hear things explained that may make you feel a little better about why we had to do some of the things we recommended when we went across the country and we laid out the computer program, we laid out the marketing plan. I know a lot of repercussion came about dictators and bosses and putting people in jail and all that kind of stuff that was misrepresented, misunderstood, whatever you want to say. And rather than get into that again, I would ask that we postpone that total explanation till we have the seminar. And may I say, there isn't anybody that has to get a terminal. It isn't law and God. You mean you don't have to have a terminal? You don't even have to take our program if you don't want to. I want you to make that clear. It's only a recommended plan for the way the new program is going to go. I think if all of you really have the time sooner or later to understand it and see why you're going to figure and believe like we do that it's one of the best things that we've ever been able to come up with. But I do know, unless you've got the time to hear it and hear it explained, it is unfair. My last account of that, and that's why I didn't do it more, was up at Airport Marina, and we thought it had been explained. We had up and had 10 minutes, and that was it. Okay, well, then one more question over in.
What information is at present to be honest, or what are we going to get?
You will have a better application program that was ever in the other one to start with, but you will have some nutritional program on the first phase. See, the first phase, on a rule of a total phase of 1 to 100, will be about 40%. But that 40% will represent almost 60% of the average problems you have, and then if you have one that didn't, the computer will flip up a signal, and you'll know that that particular card will be read direct. So you will still be covered, but you'll use it on a two-phase program. That's about all I can tell you at this time until you have the seminar. Yes, ma'am. Oh, it's been fine, but it hadn't been consummated yet, but we're trying to get that done this next week. Make these questions because I think Doc wants to finish that. Yes, ma'am? If you will let it know by talking to some of the people here that'll be in the retreat program, you talk to Jerry over here, he'll tell you what to do about where would be the best place to come in and help get them arranged to get here. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. You're talking about under the new program? Well, then I didn't quite understand your question. What was it again? Doc says you can do it either way at the present time, verbally or written. Well, now you see again, I don't know what you're going to say on that, so I don't know whether it's legal to do it at all. I can't tell that till I know what you got, but I'll say this, until you know something about our new program, whatever you do, you ought to be very careful, and I'd try to consult attorney if you got a problem, because I'm not sure if I understand what you're saying. Well, it could be right either way. It depends on whether you're operating under a license of an MD or not. If you're not operating under a license MD, I'm saying you could be in trouble. I'm only telling you the way it is. That's why we're trying to initiate this new program. And if you do not carry the license that gives you the right to practice medicine without a license, you better be careful whether you give it written or oral. So, I mean, that's why we're pushing so hard to get this new program, so you will have a program right. Answering anything a tester may do today, they could be in trouble, depending on what they do and how they do it. And since there's so many ways they're doing it out there, I wouldn't be able to answer it unless I knew specifically a specific case and knew what state that you were talking about. Yeah, I understand what Doc Reams didn't quite understand what you were referring to. Any other questions? I'm glad we got them all answered. Thank you very much. There's one more over here.
There are always so many questions unanswered. Like today's August 25th and 26th.
Well, the reason we don't want to wait that long, because I don't think everybody wants to wait to get operational, and so we're going to have it, if we possibly can, as quick as this machine and equipment is delivered. Dr. Black wanted to have it on play so that when you can take you through on the tour, you can see what actually is going to be used here at this place. And as soon as that's done, and that will be done 30 days or less, we'll know within 15 days, we'll be announcing it. So we're going to announce it just as quick as we can at the seminar. Another reason why, I know some of you have been waiting a long time to start making some money, and you want to know how to do it the right way. And we'd like to be making some money. Up to now, it's been a year's time, and all I've been doing is paying out. I'd like to see some money, too. So it's an economic reason, a practical reason, legal reason. We're going to try to get it as quick as we possibly can.
Thank you, Dr. Rudd.
If any of you here at any time would like to take a tour through the project, it's hard to put it in words. We'll be seeing that and make arrangements for you, because it is a beautiful thing to see, and there's a lot to see, and then you'll be explained as go what it's all about.
Thank you. Where's our teacher, our instructor?
All right, get your pencil and paper ready. I'm going to try and use this as little as possible. I'd like you just to listen and write. Because, I sat back there until 2 days ago going through what you're going through, and I'm still going through it. And it's a real privilege to sit at the feet of a great teacher. And it's more fun many times to do it the way I'm doing it now, and I know the way Jackson and Bob, the three of us, and Carey's been there too, because we've been able to get a glimpse of what's really looking through, like they say, through the keyhole. And so again, all we're doing is trying to interpret to you what Doc is saying, to hang a few more gems on the skeleton of this tree that we're gradually decorating. Now, you remember the discussion yesterday on the theory of the one cell structure. You remember the 4 stages that Jack went through with you. Now, if you can picture that in your mind for a few moments, we want to talk about one word, and that is relativity. Doc told us last night that he felt that it would be important for us to clarify the definition of the term relativity. And so he put it in words similar to these. He said that it's the energy left over after there is a loss of energy of unification in that molecule. In other words, therefore, I should say, in biological life, the energy left over after the structure is made is the micronage. And then he went on to say that frequency, again, or this micronage, is expressed as a measurable frequency. Now, if you remember, the 4th stage, we talked about the stole. I should say we actually talked about it before that, but you remember the stole is mentioned in those 4 stages. And Doc asked us the question, he says, when does a cell stop growing? And I like his method of teaching. And sometimes it can be confusing when you don't follow his train of thought. But you know, that's the way Christ taught. He answered questions by asking them. And I think that that's a good way to copy that method. And so I'm going to ask you if you can think of how a cell stops growing. Where does it get the information to stop growing? Why doesn't it keep on getting bigger and bigger? Pardon?
I'll bet it's from the power, and then that frequency, that power has reached the
Okay, he was turning his hand in a circle there. Doc says that if it wasn't for relativity, we wouldn't have nuts on shells and skins on bananas. Coverings. So if you're thinking of a circle, what do you end up with when you start in one place and end up where? Where do you end up? Okay, what's at the beginning? What did we just say? What's at the beginning? All right, then you end up at the stole, don't you? This is the relative factor coming through. Is that right, Doc? Okay. Now,
When it's, well, you're going to answer what determines how big the cell is going to be. Are you ready to answer that, or do you want me to? What determines the size of the cell is when the maximum energy in the cell meets the maximum of your frequency. That's what the man said over here.
now, when the maximum energy of the cell reaches that of your micronage or your frequency. Now, Doc shows us a wound in his arm. If you haven't ever had a chance to see that, he's got an old bullet wound in his arm from the Second World War, and he uses that as an illustration of cell healing and cell development. And the program comes through the central nervous system or the mind. In other words, that's programmed through programs the stole, and the stole programs the cell. And when that program frequency of the mind is reached through the nervous system, and every individual cell has its stole, which is programmed through the mind, then it's the size of that frequency. Okay, now, he got into telling us about protein. Now, what makes protein? What is the one additional element that's in protein that isn't in the... Okay, nitrogen. Now, you're aware of the constant of 6.4 times the nitrogen quantity will give us the total protein. Now, if you can, how many of you have sprouted grain? Okay, this is a big thing here. If you were to see a patient or a client, if you were to see a client in your testing program and they had a extremely high urea and content, what would you do for them, particularly if they were the old farming meat and potatoes man? What would you do for them? Pardon? Okay, combined urea. Okay, thank you. If they had a combined urea of a high level, what would be one of the things that you would do in your program? Okay, lots of water, but what else? Okay, I like that. Down the protein intake. Okay, now, if you were going to cut down the protein intake, what kind of foods then would you put them on? Okay, now remember, that Doc doesn't care for that term low stress too well, okay? Remember, because it's according to the individual needs. And Roger Williams put it in the terms of biochemical individuality. That's the programming. Now, you would put them on a low protein diet. But now, if say they were vegetarian and they had high ureas, what would you do? Soybeans, okay, high protein foods. But okay, now this man says lots of sprouts. Why? Okay. What's happened to the protein? All right. How many of you ever seen the foam on the ocean? Seen it foam? All right. You know what that is? Huh? Okay, but what's the basic ingredient of that foam? Okay. Now this is what Doc brought up. I'd never thought of it. Okay, the basic ingredient of that foam is nitrogen. That's what you answered. I'm sorry. Thank you for helping me. Now, he brought out the fact that this nitrogen foam is a cyclic. You know, it comes from the atmosphere into the ocean, again, is built up and goes back through the wind, and this is a cleansing process, part of the cleansing process that the earth has. Now, if you sprout grains, how many of you noticed a foam on the grain that sprouts? Okay, if you don't wash that off, what happens? Okay, sours, ferments, this kills the sprouts. So what do you think that foam is there? Okay, that's one of the ways of getting the nitrogen content down in a very nutritious food, of course, while you're building the enzyme of the growth factors up. And it can be low protein and yet have all the other enzyme factors that are extremely important. So then in talking about the subject that was on your schedule for this morning, this is how this fits in. It was to be called the relative biological theory of ionization of patterns in humans. And Doc uses the term cause and effect. Now, let's think of another area. If you, well, let's put it this way. Doc asked you, she says, have you ever urinated and smelled the ammonia? What is that? Okay. It is your proteins being thrown off. It's urea's breakdown. Now, it's a high concentration. It's a very high concentration. In fact, he brought out the fact that you're on the verge of a major heart attack in that condition. It's an extremely strong odor. Now, if these, well, let's go back. Where is the nitrogen stored? Where is the nitrogen stored? In the cell, in what? Okay, cell membrane now, and what else? Okay, a cytoplasm, we call it more of a protoplasm, cell protoplasm. Now, in your analysis, you analyze what when you look through and at the light and hold your urine up to the light? What are you analyzing? Albumin. But what is it in fact? Dead cells. And what is that dead cell in fact? Okay, and it's high in nitrogen content. It's bound up in there, isn't it? Okay. What would happen if your system retained that? Pardon? Swelling. Okay. Toxicity, that's true, but go beyond that. Carry it on a little bit further. What happens? Pardon? Well, you're hitting all around the point. Where? If it remains in the body, what's it do? Degenerates into what? Into salts. Okay, right. And what are one of those salts? Ammonia salts. Right. Okay. Now these ammonia salts then have a way of building up toxicity. Doc says in 3 days of retaining these protoplasmic parts of the cell, they start breaking down and you increase your salt content. Now, what would happen? What happens now with the high salt content in the body? What are some of the factors that take place now that you've tested people? Iodize it. Okay, smooth muscle. What happens with smooth muscle? Weakens it. All right. You get pickled. All right. You get pickled. Plating takes effect, but the smooth muscle particularly that Graham brought out, that's important because this is important in understanding what happens. Now, you remember Doc's explanation of the utilization of fat, and where does the enzyme come that utilization of fat and where? Thyroid, right. Okay. And he calls that similar, he uses the term grandma's soap, emulsifying agent. Now, what would happen if your body increased its thyroid production at the same time you were retaining all of these or was breaking down these retained protoplasmic parts of the cell? What? Gain weight? No, you wouldn't gain weight. Pardon? Well, he brings it out. What's the pardon? Yeah, the urea would rise, but I'm trying to think of another term. That if it gets to a certain point, stress on the heart, a person will actually die. Because what's happening is that the cholesterol starts coming off of the vessels. The cholesterol, you see, a lot of people have been so concerned about cholesterol, high this cholesterol, high that cholesterol. And the cholesterol has actually been trying to do a job with that high urea in protecting the vessel wall, protecting the smooth muscle. So then with the high thyroid, then we start an emulsifying action. Or these people go on a high lecithin or some of these other ones to emulsify this off. And it creates such a surge into the bloodstream, what happens? The whole thing collapses, and you can have a sudden death. Pectoris or an angina heart attack. Both at the same time. That's pretty bad. I think you'd have to have 2 hearts to have that, wouldn't you? 1 heart, you can have both of them. Okay. Okay. Right. Yes, he says that's one of the main results in crib death. Right. Yes, that's what this doctor brought out over here. The medical term is uremic poisoning. Okay. Now, let's go to plants for a bit, because it's important to help us understand a couple things when we talk about cause and effect. What is protein? Okay, we talked about nitrogen already. I'm looking for another answer. Okay, it's an electrolyte. Protein's an electrolyte. What does the protein do in muscle? Well, okay, that's one of its jobs, but what's the how does it go about building a tissue? What is it doing? What is it doing? What did you say over here? You answered the first question about what is protein. Okay, it's an electrolyte. And what's the electrolyte doing? Okay, it's transportation mechanism within the system. It's very important to remember. It's the origin of the magnet of the amino acid cell. Holds it together. Okay, now, do fats have nitrogen or proteins in them? Pardon? Within the relativity of the body, do fats have proteins in it? Now, you could deduce from that, from the question that they would be, I hope, the way I asked that question. It's important for us to realize that protein is an electrolyte of all phases of the body metabolism. Fat metabolism, protein metabolism, carbohydrate metabolism. You don't want to forget that. That's one of the rules. Now, okay.
Yeah, that's the last answer. What does muscle have that fat doesn't have?
Fiber.
That is correct.
Fiber. Okay, now, Doc says that a plant takes up 300 times more protein than it can use every day. Now, that's hard to believe, isn't it? Where is that? Pardon? Takes it in.
No, from the ground.
From the ground. Takes it up through the root system. Okay, now, thinking of that, where would you think that most of this protein would go if it's 300 times more than it can use? Okay, and where does it go out in the leaves? Which side? Now, it goes out the top side. Now, a lot of people, we're in a meat-eating society in the U.S., American Beef Association says buy beef and all this type of thing. Yet, even the vegetarians, of which I am, I know, groups that I'm acquainted with, they all get concerned about protein if they don't understand what it's all about. Where are you going to get your protein if you're eating all that grass type of thing? Interestingly enough, plants have as much protein as animal fiber, as animal muscle. In many cases, more so, right? And it's a lot easier assimilated. Yeah, that's the important part. We really would.
The question was, if you ate a well-rounded vegetable diet, could you get along without meats? The answer is yes, providing the vegetables had a maximum amount of mineral in them. But if they did not, you probably would land in trouble. Mincol is only one factor. There's many other factors besides mincol. The higher the sugar content, the higher the mineral content. You need to take the agricultural course.
That's a rule to remember. I do too. I agree with that. You've got to play with farming or gardening somewhere along the line. Yes, sir. I see. Okay. Well, it's just for the tape that protein goes out the top of the leaf. Pardon? I let Doc answer that. I'm accepting the fact.
It goes out in nitrate nitrogen form, and in some plants it goes out in ammoniacal form, and in some plants it goes out in nitrate, there's another term I need. Your physicists help me out there. Nitrate, no, not nitrite. Nitrogen carbonate.
Nitrogen carbonate, okay.
It's like avocados, mangoes, it goes out from plants that demand high amounts of calcium. They take in more calcium every day they can use, and in other words, a calcium nitrate. A part of a calcium nitrate would have to be in a gas form. It would be a calcium. Calcium. What was the word I used a moment? That's because the plant breathes in carbon and holds it, and it breathes out oxygen, but it takes in more carbons than it can hold, in order to manufacture the sugar. Now, if your phosphates are too low in your soils, then it can't retain all the carbons that it should hold to manufacture the sugars. So this carbons then join with the nitrogen, and you have a nitrogen carbonate. This is in the agricultural course. This you get in the agricultural course.
Don't get ahead of him. It's interesting to listen to Doc talk because he uses some homey illustrations, from down on the farm. And he told us about milk cows, which he, of course, has worked with in feed preparation for proper milk production. And I've been acquainted with somewhat in the past. But he gave us the illustration of milk cattle on a diet of 27% protein, or 24% protein, I'm sorry. And what's going on in their system versus the cattle that are on only 14% protein, provided they have enough calcium. Now, can you compare these two? Can you visualize a ruminant animal, of course, and can you visualize possibly what's happening with a high-protein diet in that ruminant animal versus the lower protein with adequate calcium? First of all, how does the ruminant animal make the protein for that milk production? Okay, there's the answer. Bacterial action in the rumen. And what kind of bacteria? Aerobic. They call them nitrogen-fixing bacteria also. Okay. Now, what is happening, though, in that animal? He says that if you took them, or you really can't take them off that diet, if you take them off that high-protein diet, the 24% protein, what happens to them? Okay, milk production goes down. Now, why? Okay, lazy bacteria. You've depressed the bacterial action because you're already putting in there. Bacteria don't need to work. Now, what happens in the 14% with the adequate calcium? Okay, we got good bacterial action the same way.
The human realm?
The same principle. Now, as far as nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the bowel, right?
A heavy meat eater.
There again, you're getting into a phenomena of body chemistry that goes back to the liver. You don't have a rumen, so this action has to take conditioning. This action happens in your colon. In other words, you don't have two stomachs; you only have one. So the bacterial action really takes place chiefly in the colon. So there are some different factors that we'll run into later.
Interestingly enough, along this line, they've shown where high fatty diets, which of course are heavy meat eaters, our friends have a high fatty diet, that this produces a increase in anaerobic bacteria in our bowel. Now you see anaerobic bacteria function without oxygen, aerobic function with oxygen, and so this tends to be a problem with oxygenation.
You can tell the difference very well which you have in your body. If it's anaerobic, the stool has a very bad odor. And if it's aerobic, it's practically odorless.
Okay, now let's define a term that I think was up this morning. What is a protein? Excuse me, what is an amino acid? I'm sorry. What is an amino acid? You answered right. A protein is an electrolyte. What is an amino acid? Okay, now Doc, again, this is where you have to understand where he's coming from in terms, because he changes these around somewhat, but yet they mean the same thing. He says that anything that contains a protein is an amino acid. In other words, the amino acids themselves are blocks of proteins, but yet the amino acid building part is protein itself, molecular size. Right, some of it is not digestible to us. Yes? Okay, any questions now so far? Again, I'm trying to go through what we interpreted from what Doc was telling us last night to try and make it easier for you to get down your paper. What happens when an amino acid joins up with some other substance? Is this what you say? What does it gain and lose in the process? Is this a relevant question for what we're talking about? You'd have to say what substance and how much. It's really not relevant unless you know that. Yeah, but you still haven't told us what amount. What makes the protein in the structure now? Okay.
Yes, in other words, the first part of a cell, the first thing that happens when the stool starts to make a cell is it is required that it has some protein. And around that protein, that whole cell will be constructed. It is the magnet that puts the cell together.
Okay, now what stores protein substance? You were talking about that, talking about joining cells together, the protoplasm. What's the one medium that's so important in joining cells together? Good, vitamin C. All right. Now this is where it comes up, the fact that how do you lose vitamin C out of your system? No, how do you lose it? Okay, skin is a primary way. And you've heard Doc talk about people taking too many baths with soap and breaking down the fat layer, oil layer on the skin. You see, with the heat process of the body, if you have washed off your oil, then the vitamin C can evaporate, be lost off the skin. But with the oil left there adequately, the heat is transferred through the oil keeps a coating on and keeps the vitamin C in. Vitamin C would be no, you said cationic. In other words, it's the structure that stores the protein. It's the cell cement type of thing. Cements the cells together. Now, earlier one of you brought up the form of, talked about low-stress foods. And again, we wanted to stay away from that term and talk about diets according to the individual. And you've often heard the term balanced diet, balanced cereal, balanced fertilizer. What does that mean? Good, nothing. It means absolutely nothing. Because what do you have to know in order for you to have a balanced diet or a balanced fertilizer or whatever? You've got to know what you've got there to work with, don't you? That's right. Got to go the numbers if it's a person. You got to know the soil analysis if you're working with fertilizer. Yes. What if vitamin C holds the cells together? What does collagen do?
Collagen disease is a lack of it. In other words, your body becomes too acid, and therefore it cannot accept the acids in the system destroys vitamin C. They're a solvent for it. In other words, because they're more caustic than the vitamin C. Vitamin C, actually, the way we take it in has a pH of less than 6. But when the liver gets through with it, if you've got enough calcium, that vitamin C, if your body chemistry is perfect, is on 640. Collagen disease is old-fashioned scurvy.
What is collagen itself, the material?
Collagen, it's the name of a disease. That's all it is.
In medical terms, they term a substance of body collagen.
I don't know. It's a lack of vitamin C is all I know about it.
Yes. If the pH is higher and the body's not accepting vitamin C, what's wrong? In 720 range.
We've answered that about 6 times in this course this week. Either a lack of calcium or a lack of oxygen. Damage to the vagus nerve going to the vital organs, or a brain tumor, which was, those 2 factors were the cause of the other 2 factors.
Now, what substance, and you should be able to get this, what substance is the key to food energy patterns then? What have we been talking about? Right, we've been talking about proteins. And Doc refers to it as a key, and what's a key do? It locks it, and it also does what? Unlocks it, doesn't it? Okay? You want to bring up that fact of the arsenic that you talked about? You mentioned to us, you were telling us about the heart valve. Okay. Doc last night was thinking along this line of cause and effect, and he was saying, what's the cause of heart valve damage? What's the cause? You heard about people having surgery on their heart valves and having a Teflon valve or some other thing put in. What is the cause of it? Bruce, what were you taught as the cause of it? Okay, but the classical teaching was the fact that it was a bacterial action due to damage or roughening of the heart, which normal blood bacteria build up on like a rheumatic valve. But Doc says it's the lack of arsenic, simple as that. The lack of arsenic. Okay, where do you get arsenic? Asparagus, yeah. Doesn't smell very good after you eat it for a while, but spray the apple trees? Now, what's the difference in spraying the apple trees with arsenic and eating asparagus?
One is arsenic of lead. It's entirely a different subject product altogether. The arsenic that you get in asparagus is a colloidal phosphate of arsenic, which is non-poisonous, but it is required by the heart. The other is possibly an arsenic oxide, which is known as black death, or an arsenic sulfate, which is also a black death, also an oxygen nitrate, which is also a black death, and also an oxygen raw phosphate. In other words, the liquid phosphate added to the black powdered natural arsenic. As it's mined, it's a black substance. And over between Egypt and Israel, there's the Gaza Strip. And unless you're born and raised in that area, you cannot live there, because you can look down at the soil and see little black particles. And those are arsenic that are large enough to pick up with your fingers. And this strip is useless, and people over there will not eat vegetables from there unless they were born and raised with it, in which they have become immune to it.
Question, yes. Is it true that the skin around the almond or the seed, this is what you're talking about? The husk of the almond is arsenic?
It contains some, yes, like the husk of peanuts or any other nut having a husk. It's very minor, but it's very hard to digest in